Hey everyone, I purchased Alaloth with my own 20 bucks. I spent 17 hours into the game, playing the campaign on a human and an elf. I finished the game by killing Alaloth, and here is my early access review. It's possible to play this co-op via Steam, but I did not do that. As you start up the game, you are greeted with a cutscene. A rather deep voice tells a bit of a story, basically how an evil god, Alaloth, is corrupting the land, and you, of course, need to stop those shenanigans. Enjoy the voice acting while you can, because the game has very few other voice lines currently. Scrolling through the menus before we actually start, the lack of options is noticeable. Graphic options are just non-existent, which is strange in a PC game. I get this is early access, but still, no resolution option, no detail options, no borderless window, nothing. Only VSync and Gamma, and that's it. Despite zero options, the game runs completely fine on my system, which you'll see on screen now. Not a big surprise because the graphics look okay, I suppose, but definitely outdated compared to other isometric games like Achilles Legends Untold or Encased or Divinity Original Sin. One more thing to note here, the devs recommend you play with a controller, and you definitely should. Mouse and keyboard controls are simply awful. Once again, a bit strange for a PC game. The devs are transparent about this though. This was a conscious choice for now to be able to ship the game. I would actually say if you don't have a controller, you probably don't want to buy this game right now. There's not much else to do in these options, so let's start a new game. You have two modes here at the moment of writing, which is July 8th, 2022, when the game is just in early access for 1 week. You can play single player without AI opponents or other champions involved, or you can have 3 additional champions in the campaign competing with you to slay Alaloth and liberate the land. You're basically playing against AI players on a digital board, the world map. I started without other champions because I wanted to get a feel for the game first without having this idea I need to keep pushing or fearing I would fall behind the other heroes. As there are no difficulty settings either, I just played it safe. When I got into character creation, I was surprised with how many options you had for races, starting weapons, character customization, alignment, background, and even a city and a clan. Quite a lot to choose here. I've also realized that currently these options are somewhat impactful, but they could be much more impactful. Unlike other, mostly CRPGs, you cannot already mess up your character in character creation. One thing I did notice, however, is that some starting areas are considerably more dangerous than others, because enemies that are very strong are roaming the starting zone. Starting as a human put me up against random skeletons, some crocodiles and rogues and bandits, enemies I could defeat rather easily. The elven starting area puts you up against much more formidable foes, dual-wielding dark elves that rip you apart in seconds. Next to this, your alignment, good, neutral or evil, has significant impact as well, determining which quests the game offers you and which companions you can hire. You don't determine a class up front, but you get to mix and match skills as you progress through the campaign, and you can pick any skill or any talent you like. Classes, therefore, aren't really a thing, like in Baldur's Gate, for example, where only mages and sorcerers have access to certain spells. That doesn't exist here, there are no restrictions. You ultimately get to pick 4 abilities and 4 talents and a bunch of passive nodes, and that's it. You can pick and choose anything you like, which I appreciate. And should you somehow mess up the skills, there are orbs of chaos or something that you can use at a shrine to reset everything, and you can respec your character that way. Alright, time to actually start after doing the initial tutorial. You're being dropped into the world, which consists of 5 kingdoms. There are humans, elves, dwarves, orcs, and the kingdom of Alaloth, the betrayer of gods. His kingdom is the 5th kingdom on the map. You are a token, if you will, a peon or pawn on a world map. And you're not the only one. Enemies, other champions, random NPCs and merchants are also peons on the map, and they move around as time progresses. In this aspect, Alaloth is very much a digital board game, and it works well. The world is open, it's littered with towns, cities, points of interest, shrines, random other locations, and fighting areas. What typically happens, the gameplay loop if you will, is that I ran towards a town which changes the viewpoint to an isometric view. You run around, talk to people to learn more about the town, the city or those ruling it. With a bit of luck, you may find an additional companion that joins you on your journey, making the game significantly easier, and of course you can pick up quests. There are plenty of quests, like over 120 quests, very beefy for an early access game. These quests vary from fetching quests in town to item delivery in another town to slaying a bunch of enemies to clearing a fighting area. The fighting areas play a pivotal role in Alaloth and they're part of the rather interesting progression system. Fighting areas are special locations on the world map indicated by a red background and skulls. The more skulls, the more difficult the fighting area is. It ranges from 1 to 4 skulls, and there's also a fighting area with a big skull indicating a massive boss fight that requires unlocking via either quests or clearing the other fighting areas in the region. There are 7 fighting areas per kingdom, and with 4 kingdoms, because Alaloth is not included, that makes for a total of 28 fighting areas to conquer, plus you have 7 additional special ones with unique boss fights and that sort of thing. And you want to conquer those areas because only once you complete a fighting area and slay the final boss and loot the big chest at the end, only then do you gain a level. The primary way to progress your character is by clearing these zones. This is interesting because in many other similar games you would accrue experience by fighting monsters, either because you would get direct XP from them, like in Baldur's Gate, or because you get a currency from them which you can exchange for attributes and skills, like in Souls-like games. In Alaloth, slaying monsters gets you nothing really, just a bit of loot which translates to gold. Only finishing these instances grants you levels, and only once you level up, you get to pick new traits, skills, passives and abilities. Leveling up makes your character much stronger, so it is essential that you get in minimum shape to take on those fighting areas, to get that leveling going. Without abilities, your character can be rather weak. Interestingly, there is a cap on leveling as well. As soon as you reach the point where you picked 4 traits and 4 skills, there's only limited leveling left, because now you can only get passive points when you level. Once you have 10 of those, leveling doesn't happen anymore at all, no matter how many fighting areas you clear. There are other ways to progress your character, of course. I already mentioned forming a party with other companions. That is very useful. You can do some bounties from a bounty board, slay a bunch of goblins for example and collect the gold. You can just kill monsters, get their loot and sell the loot for gold. And using these new riches, you can visit vendors and get yourself a good weapon and decent armor, making your fighting life significantly easier. There are quest rewards providing you with unique loot as well, although the good rewards usually involve clearing fighting areas or fighting difficult monsters, so that's not a great starting point if you are a fresh character. And finally, once you collect more resources, there is crafting as well. It's still rather basic, but blacksmiths in town offer crafting services, taking your crafting materials and turning it into an armor or weapon of random rarity, ranging from normal to legendary. You can enchant your gear too with gems you find during your travels. A special NPC can put those gems into gem sockets. Once you get the hang of the various ways to improve your character, you will quickly figure out that with a few quick purchases or by completing a few specific quests, you'll be able to get really good gear. And then the game becomes a walk in the park. Your objective in the game is to collect 4 fragments shattered throughout the 4 kingdoms. You retrieve these fragments by killing bosses in the fighting areas. Collect all 4, you need to visit a bunch of druids who restore the 4 fragments into an artifact, which you can now use to take on your final challenge, Alaloth itself. This is the whole game pretty much. Rather generic story to be fair, but Alaloth isn't all that story driven like other CRPGs are. It contains a ton of lore, but don't expect to be completely empathic towards your own or other characters in the game. It is just not on that level, and it doesn't try to be either, I think. This isn't Pillars of Eternity in that regard, where over the course of 40 hours you bond with your teammates. Nah, Alaloth is much more a plug-and-play run where you may or may not pick up some companions, and you do well-written but still sort of standard quests. The narrative is secondary. It's all about the exploration, clearing instances, character progression as a result of those, and the combat. After messing around in single player without opponents, it's time for my second playthrough. And now that I know the game quite a bit and wandered around the world for like 7 or so hours, becoming rather powerful, it's time for the next one. And in my second playthrough, starting this time as an elf versus other champions, I was absolutely ripping through the campaign and was just completely demolishing the competition. Part of that is the beautiful but static world design. The world, characters and instances are not randomized, so once you know which location offers you good rewards, you can just go there and complete the mission. Everything is static in that regard and it reduces the replayability of this game quite a bit. I did have fun for all my 17 hours, but in its current state I don't see too many reasons why I would do another run, apart from perhaps creating a character with a different alignment so I can see different quests and companions. Let's talk some more about the runs themselves, however, because there are still quite a few things I haven't touched on. Something that sets this game apart from the competition, I feel at least, is the combat. It is Souls-like action combat in an isometric view. This isn't totally unique, because the recent early access game Achilles Legends Untold does it as well, but that game is much more a Diablo-inspired game. It is an ARPG in almost every aspect, with just different combat. Alaloth should be more seen as a CRPG in every way, inspired by classics like Baldur's Gate, but with different combat, getting rid of the turn-based combat, replacing it for Souls-like action combat. I hope that analogy makes some sense. And that combat works fairly well. It's not amazing, but it is definitely serviceable. Blocking, parrying, dodging, it's all there and it works. Targeting kind of works too. However, against larger groups of enemies, it gets very hectic real fast and the Souls-like element moves to the background, as there's no way to track the movements and abilities and just track the enemies in general when you've got 8 of them on the screen. So what you do is basically use 2 skills, making you practically invulnerable, and start button mashing. If the devs want to keep the spirit of Souls-like combat alive, I think they should reduce the number of enemies in the instance, but make them much more harder and much more punishing. For example, in Elden Ring, trash monsters can still pose a threat if you're not paying attention. In Alaloth, that's not really the case anymore at some point. Still, all things considered, when fighting no more than, let's say, 3 or 4 enemies, I thought the targeting and handling of combat was well done. And it definitely was Souls-like combat, from an isometric perspective. Maybe a very short bit about dying. It is pretty easy to die, especially at the start. Once you do, you get sent to a shrine, you lose a bunch of days, you lose a bunch of durability, and what's a little annoying is that the fragments you collected for the main quests are now returned to nearby fighting areas, meaning you need to do those again. Or in my case, you run the risk that an AI champion notices your death, rushes to the fighting area, which now holds your fragment, and loots that fragment that you just dropped. I thought it was actually pretty funny, but if this keeps happening, I'm not sure I would continue to be amused. Another aspect I enjoyed quite a lot in Alaloth was the world and level design. This thing has been baking in the oven for a while now. It was supposed to release in 2018, if you can believe it. While that definitely shows in the graphical fidelity, which I feel is lacking, it also shows in the world and level design, which is top-notch. Locations are typically unique. I've hardly seen any copy-pasting going on apart from taverns. The fighting areas are well made too, with enemies being placed carefully, and they have somewhat interesting boss fights as well. The world is static, I don't think anything is procedurally generated, but what the devs have created is very atmospheric and immersive. For a fantasy kingdom setting like this, I feel immersion is important, and I definitely felt like I was part of this world. This immersion is further increased by the huge amount of lore and stories in the world. There are a lot of cities and towns and NPCs, they all have something to say, they offer tons of quests, and by taking in the lore, you get much more appreciation for the world on display here. It's a bit of a shame then that there's no more voice acting, especially in the main quest. I feel they could elevate that involvement some more. Now it is quite a bit of reading. The early access section on Steam does state this is planned for the future, by the way, voice acting for the main quest. Something closely related to this is the music and sound design, which is not the department where the money went on this one, let's say. Nowhere was the music annoying, but nowhere did it stand out either. It's all very generic, very copyright-free feeling, typical fantasy music. Nothing special. Once again, a bit of a shame, because music can play a massive role in a world like this. But yeah, There's only so much you can expect from a small indie studio, and quality music, voice acting and sound design is very expensive. My second run, like I mentioned, was a walk in the park, which brings me to one of the final points of my review, the balancing. For the devs, the balancing is one of the main reasons why Alaloth is in early access. Because make no mistake, this is overall a perfectly functioning game, which in almost no regard feels like an early access title. I mean, yeah, a hotfix wiped all my collected fragments and basically broke my first campaign, but okay. We'll let that one slip for now, dear devs. And to be fair, this is specifically mentioned on the Steam page once again that this could happen. But just in terms of gameplay, characters, lore, the world, the whole thing pretty much, it's very polished. And I don't expect any big changes there. Early access is not supposed to be that long, it's only 1 year. We probably will not get updated sounds and music, I would imagine. Levels aren't going to be randomized, most likely. None of that is going to happen. What will hopefully happen though is balancing. For those who know me, I'm a filthy casual, you know? I don't mind a journalist mode. My real life job already throws plenty of complex situations my way. When I'm gaming, I don't mind simple and easy. But even I find the game to be too easy. In my second campaign, I bought a two-handed sword and a piece of armor from the starting zone for 6k gold in total, which isn't hard to get, and then with those two pieces of gear I completed the entire campaign, and I was miles ahead of my competing AI champions that were also trying to collect fragments and slay Alaloth. Difficulty sliders would help for sure, but overall this game should be a bit more difficult, especially because it's marketed as a Souls-like game. It's way too easy to have that label. A few more points of feedback from my perspective. After every encounter, your entire gear loses 1 durability. Some pieces like jewelry only have 3 durability and then they break. I think that's just too punishing, and it's rather annoying because I find myself constantly visiting a town looking for a blacksmith to repair my gear. 3 fights, that's nothing when roaming the lands. I don't mind an opportunity cost, I think that's a good thing, but maybe do that in the form of repair kits you can buy so you can repair your own gear, or a field repair trait, something like that. Something I'd like to see as well is more game modes being added, I think that would be cool. The no other champions versus other champions is already quite a difference, because the first option lets you freely roam the lands without any pressure, that's cool, and the other puts a bit more pressure on you, which definitely is a twist. I can imagine more game modes, however, maybe with Alaloth slowly taking over the land, occupying towns that make them unusable or corrupted, so over time there are less and less options for you to go. That would be an interesting twist as well. But all in all, to conclude, Alaloth Champions of the Four Kingdoms is just a very solid early access title. It costs 25 euros, which I think is fairly priced. You're bound to get that many hours of fun out of this title as well. 25 hours is not a stretch at all, and if what I've been talking about sounds good to you, it's a recommendation for sure. I do not regret my purchase. I had fun discovering what this game had to offer, and I'm curious to see improvements to the game. You can subscribe to this channel because every week I do a roundup covering all sorts of indie game updates and news, and updates to Alaloth are featured over there for sure. I hope you enjoyed this review. Thanks for watching and making it to the end. If you have any questions about this game, just put them in the comments, you know. See you soon. Love you all. Bye bye.